Good to be here. Always good to be here. Welcome to a brand new episode of Matt's Art Chat after a week-long break, which I feel like I needed psychologically and physically too. After being regular with this series of podcasts, I just needed to take a break, and I did. But now I'm back, and I'm happy to be back, and I'm going to be regular again. Podcasts uploaded on a weekly basis every Thursday, despite the fact that on a previous short video that I made, I said that I would be posting them on Tuesdays, but no, I've kind of gone back on that, and they're going to be published every Thursday on a weekly basis because it just works better for me, and they will be published on YouTube, Spotify, Podbean, and other audio platforms here or there, but I've kind of lost track of them, so I don't know exactly. But anyways, I kind of got carried away there. Yes, if you're watching this video on YouTube, the introduction is being filmed via my webcam. I didn't feel like setting up the camcorder, but I'm also a little fed up with the audio that I'm getting from it, so I figured that it would actually be better to just plug in the microphone into the laptop, so that way the audio is clear, and obviously that works better for the audio version. The audio needs to be good on a podcast, so there you go. Also, I'm just fed up with the audio that I'm getting with that camcorder in general, so I don't think that I'm going to be filming anything until I'm able to get an external microphone for it. Because obviously that means that if I'm filming stuff on my webcam, the video quality of my webcam is way worse than my camcorder, but that's what I've decided. So this podcast is being published on April 30. This year, I found out for the first time that April is celebrated as National Poetry Month in the United States. But I personally took that to mean that it is Global Poetry Month or Universal Poetry Month. So it's appropriate that on the last day of Universal Poetry Month, I should publish an interview with an author and a poet, Naomi Foyle, and it was a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. I met Naomi a good few years ago here in Prague when I first moved here the first time, and of course then I left, and now I'm stuck here because of the coronavirus pandemic. I think I'll be stuck here for another while, but I am doing all right. I'm doing all right, I think. Hopefully you are too, and if you're not, I hope you get well soon, both physically and mentally. In the meantime, I do hope that you enjoy my conversation with Naomi Foyle about art, writing, poetry, life in general, and whatever is going on in the world around us. So without further ado, enjoy.
Hello.
Hello, Naomi. How are you? It's good to hear you again.
It's lovely to be in touch. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah,
it's coming at quite an interesting time, isn't it? I should have been on a plane, leaving Gatwick, taking off for New York City. And instead, I'm in solitary confinement in my own home, while my government criminally mismanages their response to a global pandemic. So,
yeah.
All things considered, I think I'm doing pretty well.
And I'm going to ask you about all of that, but first, now I'm intrigued. What was the plan in New York?
Well, I was in New York last summer in August to launch my third poetry collection, Adamantine, which is published by Red Hen Press, which is actually in LA. But being having an American publisher, and being Canadian, I wanted to celebrate the book in North America, and I've got a lot of friends in New York, so that made more sense to me than going to LA. So I had readings in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, and New Jersey, and then I went on to Western Canada, and the prairies, and also Vancouver and Vancouver Island. But while I was in New York, I had a reading with Dolores Hayden, another Red Hen poet who's written a book called Exuberance, which is about the early days of aviation. And we both had a kind of interest in pioneering women. And she arranged for me to read at the KGB bar. So that was what was going to happen on Monday, actually, on the 27th. And then around, January, I just started getting lots of emails from people in New York saying, "Are you sure you really want to come?" My friend said she wasn't even going out of her apartment anymore, even at the end of January. She could see what was coming, and obviously, and then now it's I'm not even allowed to go. My flight is cancelled. But I adapted. I actually did. I was in a little bit of denial to start with. I will confess that. But as soon as I really realised the gravity of the situation, it's like, of course you can't go. And of course, actually, now is a time where we don't think about ourselves. We think about the big picture right now and the fork in the road that we have as a species. So that's what I'm trying to do. I live my day-to-day routine and I try and take care of myself, and I actually appreciate the lockdown for that. But I also keep an eye on what's happening and, really think how we're going to come out of this, because it seems to me like we can't go back. One reason why we can't go back is because the way we were living was unsustainable. So we might think we can go back, but we can't. And it looks as though, the response to this virus is either going down the disaster capitalism route, or it's going down a route of a revolution of compassion. And that's what you see the grassroots doing. That's what you see people doing. Not necessarily what you see governments doing, but there are some signs that governments are starting to act on that. So, I'm cautiously hopeful, really. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a strange time that we're living in, but it does sound heartbreaking that you had to cancel all of those readings and plans were changed. It's also heartbreaking to think that, unfortunately, a lot of countries, they're finding out about all of these things and that we have to change our way of life the hard way right now.
Well, this is it. And you see, the thing is, I think we're all tiny little, just tiny little parts of this drama. And while I can try and look at the whole picture, really, probably the most powerful way for me to look at it is through my own experience, through that filter. And for me, where I most closely relate to it is through my experience having had cancer 3 years ago. Because I realized that I'm really lucky. I have a job, I'm working from home, my income remains the same. I have good friends around me that, I'm in constant contact with online. I have shops that have never, there's no shortages at my shops. But when I think about, learning things the hard way, for me, I did that with the cancer. So I know that it can be done. I know that these sorts of existential ordeals and crises, can uplift us, and they can change us on a kind of molecular level, really. My whole attitude, my whole mental health changed after having had cancer. I just really, when you hit rock bottom and you realize actually what's there is love, that I was never going to fall through that net of love that I'd, created in my life through friends. And I'm never going to take that for granted again. Friends and family, that's given me a whole new perspective on life. And I really hope that that's what the kind of thing that's happening now as people realize, for example, here in the UK, it's been, immigrants have just taken the brunt, haven't they, of, so much hatred and abuse, exploitation, violence, over the years, and we saw that was so ugly as coming out in Brexit. And now we're, it's the hard way because it's people of colour who are dying at a greater percentage, especially in the healthcare system, healthcare workers. But I've never seen the media place so much attention on people of colour. The BBC every night they're talking about it now. So maybe that will lead to some kind of at an official level recognition of the contribution that immigrants are making. To our society.
But at the same time, I am worried about one thing. I'm worried about what's going to happen after this pandemic, in the sense that there's probably going to be an economic crisis, and I fear that people will be angry and they'll just look for somebody or something that they can be angry towards, and usually that ends up being the other, and I'm kind of worried about that.
Well, it's going to be, I certainly don't say these things in any kind of naive hope that suddenly everyone's going to have this wonderful, awakening of compassion but I think that in an uneven kind of way and in a sort of erratic way, I think we can start working in that direction. And when I look at, like in Spain's bringing on universal credit, I think, universal basic income, Universal credit is a totally other thing. And I also think that on a kind of a neighborhood level, we're far more aware now. Looking back at like the Black Plague, it caused a huge change in the economic system of the time. It helped, didn't maybe cause the end of feudalism, but it accelerated it, because suddenly the laborers who were left had a different relationship to the lords, because there were so few of them. They could do things more on their own terms. And now I think maybe something similar might happen if people can organize collectively. We know who the key workers are now. We know that they should not be so underpaid. Maybe we'll start to get a sense of a shift in economic priorities. But none of these things happen just because they seem, to people sitting on their sofas like wonderful things that might happen. They only happen when people organize. And that's frustrating at the moment, because that's not happening on the streets, where sometimes it needs to happen as a show of strength. But it's certainly going to be happening with a lot of, all the online communications.
Yeah. And would you be somebody who would often participate in these gatherings in the streets?
Well, I have with Extinction Rebellion, and also through work with, in terms of Palestine, done a lot of demonstrating. And it is great, you're just standing there handing out leaflets and chatting with people. You are giving them an alternative way of looking at things, and they will be seeing every day in the newspapers and on the news. And you're giving them the chance to converse and ask questions as well. So I think it is really important. I really believe in public spaces. Having the internet is a lifeline at the moment, but I really believe in the value of people being physically in a space together, partly because also on the internet, it's so easy for arguments to get polarized and kind of nasty very quickly. Whereas I think when you've got the person in front of you and you can read their body language, and there's that respect that I think we instinctively know is due to each other. Or we know other people are watching as well. I think that's an arena in which maybe change can happen.
Yeah, I asked Lucian in the previous podcast. You know Lucian, of course. I asked him a very simple question: whether he thought that poetry could play a role in these times, and what was the role of poetry in these times? And what would you say that role is?
Well, I really do think that poetry is just an essential part of human existence and human growth, really. I mean, for me, I could say that poetry is the art of paradox. Poetry is a musical form of language, and it's, poetry is about creating beauty. And I think that draws us to it at times, especially of grief. I think even if you don't think that you're a poet or don't even read much poetry, you might want to have a poem at your wedding, or a poem at a funeral. At moments of kind of heightened emotion, we do reach for poetry. But also, I think, poetry can hold a lot of complicated and contradictory feelings, in balance in a poem. And so right now we've got a lot of anger, but we also have a lot of love, and so a poem is maybe a place where we can try and kind of explore that and hold that, the contradictions and tensions of this moment.
Yeah. Do you think that like love and anger are somewhat, they're very close? They're concepts that are very close?
Well, I think anger is really important. I mean, anger I distinguish from hatred. I mean, it was very interesting for me when Boris Johnson went into hospital. I felt really shocked. I would be fine to say that I hate Boris Johnson. I hate his policies. I never met the man. Maybe it's not fair for me to say I hate him. But I can't deny that, maybe I do hate him because of what he stands for and the things that he's done. I went and canvassed in his constituency in the election, for his Labour opponent, Ali Milani, in the hope that, maybe there could be this historic upset and Ali might win. But then when he went into hospital, I realized, I was very disturbed. I was upset, and I realized I have an emotional relationship with him. It's based on anger, but it doesn't mean that I want him to die, not at all. I was not wishing badly of him. My anger at him was not to do with hatred, it was to do with him being a human being with a hell of a lot of power who has used it to the detriment and harm of so many people. So, I hold out hope that maybe he's still thinking that over, his experience, and that it will affect a change. I'm not going to hold my breath over it.
But do you see it? Do you see it starting to change, or do you notice any change in the way he's kind of talking or what he's saying?
Well, he did definitely give a speech when he came out, praising the NHS and praising the nurses by name, and in particular naming the two who stood over him for 48 hours on their shifts while he was in intensive care, and he named them also by where they're from Portugal and New Zealand, so clearly indicating that he understood that these were immigrants looking after him. And Russell Brand had actually a really good letter to Boris that he wrote and read on a kind of a video, Twitter, a video, where he said maybe that was a cynical move on Boris Johnson's part, because he knew that if he named these nurses and he didn't say where they were from, then the Guardian would find out where they were from and hold it against him. So, we never know how much we can trust Boris Johnson. He's a canny, he's intelligent for sure. But from my own experience of being deathly ill, I know that it does have the potential to be able to change you at least. So let's see what happens. Yeah. He's not really out of his convalescence yet, so it's hard to say.
Well, back to the theme of poetry. I wanted to know, who were your favorite poets growing up?
Oh, well, growing up, I really liked, obviously, if you like, Sylvia Plath. So many people come to poetry through Sylvia Plath. Yeah, and because, when you're a teenager and you're going through those intense feelings, she just expresses them so powerfully. And also I read The Bell Jar, and that's as a coming of age novel, and a novel about the double standard as well, because, she's really, the heroine is, she wants to live. She wants to be sexual, and she's living in a world where she's supposed to be kind of totally buttoned up. It's this sort of 50s femininity. And it leads her to these, these very kind of dark places and whatever else is going on under the surface. For her.
That's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, I felt, I had a turbulent adolescence, so I certainly related a lot to Sylvia Plath's work. But also W.H. Auden, I really liked his poems. I kind of remember trying to memorize his poems at one point. Kind of the clarity and the philosophical nature there of that work. And then Yeats, I was kind of put on to Yeats in my early, when I first year university. I had a great English professor.
And when did you realize that you could write poetry, or when did you try to write your own poems?
Well, the thing is, my mother was a poet and a short story writer, and she died 25 years ago. So she died when I was in my 20s. But she always really encouraged me as a child. I actually wanted to be an actor when I was young, but she always encouraged me with writing. And then at university, I kind of made a shift. I sort of got a little bit self-conscious about auditioning, I remember. And I knew I could write. And in the end, I was writing poems, getting them published in university magazines. Then I wrote a song cycle with my then boyfriend, who was a composer. And then that took off and became an opera, actually. So a chamber opera. So it was an organic process, and certainly in a sense, I'm the fruit that didn't fall far from the tree, because I'm not someone that had to battle a background of, disinterest, in the home or anything. Do
you think that
I was very much encouraged?
Do you think that it was important to have that encouragement?
Well, I think initially it could be a little bit intimidating, and maybe that's why I didn't, go down that path from the very beginning. Because when you have a mother who's, a successful writer, she published 3 books in Canada, and she was on the national radio, and she did Bumbershoot, the festival in Seattle, so it's kind of maybe feeling like I wanted to make my mark in my own way, in my own field to start with, and then realizing that there was a way of doing both, because I've always also, as a poet, I've always enjoyed performing as well. So I was able to kind of keep on to that side of, my character that really loves theatre and drama.
So you never forgot about your dreams of becoming an actor then?
Well, I still sometimes come back to them, actually. I was starting to think now, maybe I should, do some videos. But I'm working with a puppeteer at the moment, and I don't think I'll be doing any acting or learning, how to be a puppeteer. But I'm adapting my science fiction novels for a puppet theatre production with Raven Caliana, who's runs her own Puppet Revolution company. And is very interested in the books. And it's just great to have someone who believes in the books, So that's whetted my appetite. And so I am looking forward to going back to the theatre in that way. Hopefully. It's a long game. It takes a long time because we're both very busy juggling lots of projects. But I feel it will happen.
I'm sure. But that does really sound very interesting. How did that project start? Who came up with the idea first?
Well, it hit me like a lightning bolt within about 3 minutes of meeting her. I met her at a friend's birthday party, and I can't remember if she said she liked science fiction or not, but I remember just suddenly realizing puppets, of course, because the thing about my novels that to me has always, that from the beginning, I just felt, well, these are never going to be films, they're never going to be a play, because they start off in a country of nudists, and the protagonist is a child. So how can you have, nude children? Maybe you could have grown actors playing nude children. Perhaps you could have that. But it just seemed very unlikely. Possibly you could have, them in cartoons, in graphic novels, with sort of shades. But it would all, I would feel uncomfortable, really. To me, the idea was that it's a piece of literature. So everything that's happening, it's all happening in your imagination, And no one, I think, would read my books for some kind of, horrid thrill, because these are quite intense books about kind of quite heady moral, kind of moral dilemmas, really. But I realized when I met Raven that puppets might be a way that you could do it. So she liked the idea. She read the books, and actually a lot of her work has been about protecting children. She has a history, and she won't mind me saying this because she's very open about it. She's been on the BBC about it and in The Guardian about it. She was trafficked as a child by her own family, and she spent her professional career working as with trauma and recovery through the puppets and the productions that she makes and the communities that she works with, of therapists and also people who've been through it, and also professionals and child protection professionals as well. So for her, because that is a theme in the books, because these new children, at the beginning, it seems like it's Eden, but then you realize that actually it's quite a sinister place, and it becomes more sinister as the novels go on. So for her, actually, it was like really quite close to home. So, that kind of brainwave that I had when I met her, it was a bit like a psychic moment in a way. It's like my force field met her force field, and there was nothing we could do about it, but we had to collaborate.
That sounds like an amazing story. It's amazing how she was able to go through all that and just use her experience in an empowering way.
It is actually really extraordinary, yeah. And I think part of it is through, well, with puppets, you can, as with poetry, really, the speaker in the poem is never really the same as yourself, as the poet. But with the puppets, there's that distancing, isn't it? You can kind of get that distance and perspective on your own experience, and you can take control of it as well. You can shape it. You can refocus, your attention on it. So you can focus on the beauty and the tenderness and the love, and for example, in her work, between the children who are all in this situation, who are in this situation together, and the adults in it, you barely see. You just kind of see their hands. So they're not the center. You can recenter the focus on the people who are important.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it's interesting how puppetry or animation or other forms like that sort of add that element of distance that allows you some sort of distance to think your own thoughts in a sense. Do you think that that's also part of why you are interested and you like science fiction?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I never think of it as escapism. I think of it in, as a kind of a visionary art form, really, or literary form. It always sort of strikes me as bizarre that we're so obsessed with historical fiction. We're obsessed with crime fiction. These are the really popular genres. It's like, we're obsessed with things that we can't change, and, sort of really the most violent shadow side of humanity. Whereas, we've got an opportunity with our imaginations to envision a better world. And science fiction is the genre where we can really do that, because we can take ourselves, ahead in time. We can see, just in our own, even in your short life, how much change has gone on. I mean, in terms of veganism, in terms of, trans politics, just over the last 5 years, massive change has gone on. Not to mention, obviously, awareness of climate change. So I think that we have kind of a responsibility as writers. I don't want to be heavy-handed about it, because I think our ultimate responsibility is to ourselves. But for me, growing up in the household that I did, because my father's a social worker and very socialist and very politically minded, those things are fused in me to try and use art to demonstrate that it's not naive, it's not romantic to imagine that we can do better than we're doing right now as a species, Yeah.
No, I mean, that's the hope, right? You always hope to strive for better things. But you know what? Yeah. When it comes to science fiction, though, I mean, that too can be abused. For example, see 1984 abused all the time. Its significance and just kind of it's used in ways to represent something that perhaps wasn't exactly what Orwell was going for. That's the first example that comes to my head.
Well, I recently reread that, and I think it's just like such a tremendous novel, isn't it? And it, just how prophetic it was. The idea of the screens on the walls and being watched at all times, and this was even really before television was really big, I suppose. So the way he saw things were going, and this idea of this perpetual war. I mean, we're still not out of the perpetual war between East and West, are we? So I think, and I agree, because I think there's two different kind of sides to the coin with science fiction. There's a side to science fiction that has very much been about, in a sense, celebrating colonialism, like all the space operas where, it's all about exploiting the other. And then you also, even right now, even with the feminist dystopias, I worry about the feminist dystopias because, yes, they reflect anger that women have, but how are we going to, if we just flip it round so that women have the power, and to harm men, how are we going to get out of the binary, really? So with my novels, they're set in the quartet anyway. I've written one other standalone that's a bit more, maybe it is a bit more of a feminist dystopia, but my more recent novels are set in a post-fossil fuel world where they're trying to rebuild technologically and also politically. There are new kind of forms of democracy arising. There's much more of a sense of local councils, and the UN has been reformed. But people are still struggling with conflicts, of course. But they're doing so within a different kind of political framework.
What is that novel called?
Well, the quartet is called the Gaia Chronicles, and the first novel is called Astra, and then the second is Rook Song, followed by The Blood of the Hoopoe, and the final novel is called Stained Light. And they're set in kind of a parallel Mesopotamia, which is another reason why science fiction was, really the obvious choice for me, because I wouldn't. Although I am very interested in the Middle East and I've traveled there, I don't really think I could write a contemporary novel set in the Middle East unless it was purely as like a sort of a travelogue from a point of view of an outsider. But the idea of Eden for me, and all the kind of I suppose I was interested in the in the particular colonial structures around Israel-Palestine. Led me to set it in a kind of a parallel Middle East, and then but as soon as I started writing, I also realized I was obviously writing about my own childhood in Canada, growing up as a European settler in Canada. I was writing about Ireland as well. I was writing about Australia. All of that fed into it. So I wouldn't call the books a direct allegory at all for Israel-Palestine, though when you get to Rook Song, which is set in a refugee camp, I think some reviewers have picked up on that.
You know, it's funny because I've never published a novel, but I do write. I love to write, even if it's just for myself. And sometimes I set off with an idea of what to write about, and I soon realize that I'm actually always writing about myself and writing about specific things from my own life. What you said rings true to me. I mean, with my limited amount of experience in this field, but I've always wanted to ask this, and I don't think I ever have. But as a writer, do you find that writing is also, like the act of writing itself, therapeutic? Do you believe that writing can be a therapeutic sort of act?
Well, I think it is, and absolutely, I think it is. I think it's as I say, it's a kind of this way of shaping this really turbulent experience of being human, and I think, unfortunately, there was a period where I'm afraid to say I feel like it was a lot coming from the men, really, the male critics, is that, to call writing therapeutic was kind of a lower level of writing, because it was all about the person's emotions rather than about the craft of writing. But, it's about both, really. And the more skill and craft that you have, in a way, the more profound the healing is, I suppose. Because it demonstrates that it's not just about a splurge, it's an ongoing, it's like life. When are we ever fully healed? We're never fully healed. We're always coming up against our shadow side, and we always need to kind of refine our response to it. So, yes, I would say very much healing, and the world needs healing. So I'd have no embarrassment, about saying that and believing that.
No, I agree with you, because I think the whole masculine thing is just really a global mentality that's been plaguing our world for far too long. I say that as a man. So, but when you grow up as a man, you are taught from the start that you shouldn't be so open with about your emotions, and I think that also plays a big role in that.
Well, I agree, and I think that this gets really overlooked, but I think it is something that women can't really take the lead on. I think it's something that men have to acknowledge and work with each other. Maybe trans people have a role to play there, having had, experience of both. There are a lot of quite interesting, really powerful, important men's, movements going on. I don't know if you've seen a film called The Work, which is about therapy in a high security prison in America. Extraordinary. It's just an extraordinary film. On certain weekends, they invite men from outside to come in and join, as equals with the prisoners. And the prisoners act, well, actually, I say that, but actually the prisoners, because they've got experience of doing this week in, week out, they take the lead, and hold these men who might come in thinking, oh, well, I don't have nearly as many problems with these guys. These guys ended up in prison. I'm going along just to see what might happen. And when they get there, they realize that their feelings are just as powerful and just as raw and damaging as the feelings of the men who have ended up, being killers.
Gosh, there's so much pain in the world, right? It's overbearing.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I feel as though, with the media and even with art, to a certain extent, we get drawn into the violence. There's something vicarious about it. And, so we need to also appreciate more, slower, more contemplative sort of art forms, and we need to appreciate the serene, and realize that we don't need conflict to be interested in life. We can be interested in joy.
Well, this is what I always think.
And the great, beauty and variety of life.
This is what I always think, because I also always think that the problem with interpretation is that there is always multiple ways of seeing things, which is why one of the reasons why I love Picasso, because when you look at a painting like Picasso, you see like millions of different perspectives. And so when the lockdown was when the coronavirus became a huge thing, pandemic was announced, and the lockdown started to happen. The first few days I was shocked about how I would respond to it. And then I realized that there is people who spend their lives trapped in their own homes. And I was like, oh my goodness, I feel terrible about that,
Well, I think that it's always really important when we're sensitive and politically aware not to get burnt out, not to get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
To set boundaries, to do things, that we know are helpful in our own sphere, really, and to build up a kind of a positive feedback loop around that, I guess. So, I try and a lot of my, if you like, activism is around my editing work, because I just feel like it's so important to change conversations. So I'm involved in the Lit Up program at Waterloo Press, which is a mentoring and publishing program for poets of colour, and we've got 9 books coming out over a year. And that, to me, just feels like really crucial work to keep at, because it's going to make a huge difference to those poets. It's going to make a difference to the UK poetry scene. It's going to make a difference to my press. It's going to maybe attract more people from those communities to send work into my press, which is, really what I want to see happen there. And the kind of things that they're writing about, when you say about therapy, well, a lot of them are writing, not all of them, but a lot of them are writing about racism and how painful it is. And, I think racism gets talked about in this very kind of crude way, as in, people are getting offended. And to me, it's not about people getting angry and offended. It's about people being hurt and demoralized. And from the very, before they can even remember, being told that they're not very good, and internalizing all of that. And, poetry is a place where that's a really complicated thing, I would think, for anyone to acknowledge. And especially if you're, in a sense being, you're being expected to be a warrior, to acknowledge I don't actually, I feel really vulnerable. I feel like maybe I believe that about myself, but, I've got, a poet, C Sharp, and they address these issues in their work. And, I just find like that's something that needs to be said. And it actually can really only be said in poetry. So, so I'm pleased to be able to do that. And I'm, you giving people a voice here, and I'm sure in other things that you do, giving people a sense that they're valued, and we all need that, because I think mental health should not also be dismissed as a kind of a luxury or a frivolity to care about. Just because people are hungry doesn't mean to say we shouldn't also care that people are depressed, because then they're not contributing to the fullest. They're not contributing to the kind of world that we all want to live in. They're not experiencing that world. They're not enjoying it either.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a conversation is an engine for just forward motion. But if we get the same voices speaking all the time and the same perspectives, then that's not enough fuel for us to keep history going or keep civilization going, moving forward.
Well, yeah,
that's the problem.
And the thing about self-esteem, really, is really significant here, because the people who speak in our culture are the people who have a sense and a way of entitlement to speak. And that might be me as a middle-class white person, but it took me longer perhaps to get there as a woman. And we need to just create those spaces where people feel valued and gain the confidence, and you can gain in confidence through the act of speaking and the act of being heard and being valued.
I wanted to ask you about the Martin Crawford Award. You mentioned that to me, that you were involved in it. Could you tell me more about it?
Well, yeah, Martin Crawford, who very tragically died in 2004 at the age of 36, was a really dear friend of mine. We were involved at one point, but we were always friends and literary comrades, really. He was a really significant figure in the Belfast literary scene and the Northern Irish literary scene in general, really. In the 80s and 90s, he edited magazines. He organised live literature events. He was the director of the Cathedral Arts Festival for a while. And when he died suddenly of a brain hemorrhage, he was on the point. He had been in talks for having his first collection of poetry published, because he spent a lot of time. He was a teacher as well, supporting other people, programming other people, mentoring other people. He hadn't got round to doing his own collection, which I ended up editing. So that was good. So he was acknowledged as a poet. And then recently, 3 years ago, the Crescent Arts Centre, where he worked, inaugurated a prize in his name. And the prize, which is quite fitting, very fitting for the work that he did, is to celebrate emerging writers. So it's for poets and now also for short story writers who haven't had the first full collection published. And the idea is you send in a short story or 3 to 5 poems so they get a sense of it. And then the prize is £1,000, and there are 2 runner-up prizes of £250. and there's also a writing retreat. And I'm one of the judges this year, so I'm really touched and honoured to be involved in it, because it's just kind of this, he is a soulmate of mine, and I have this lifelong relationship with him through his memory and the way that, the fact that he's so kind of remembered and loved still in Belfast. So I'd just like to say to anyone listening, the deadline I think is May 13th, so check it out. Martin is Mairtin, Martin Crawford Award. It's on Twitter as well, and you can get all the kind of the details there.
Sounds fantastic. It's funny to use that word, fantastic. We were just talking about science fiction not a few minutes ago. I always think that whenever I say that word, actually, I think of what it also means, and it's kind of strange to use it in the way that it's used most often. We're recording this interview on the 24th of April, and I actually found out this year for the first time ever that in the United States this month is considered Poetry Month. So in my mind, it has now become the Universal Poetry Month, in the sense that this is the month where I like to think that everyone in the world is celebrating poetry. And I was wondering whether you might care to read maybe one of your poems, or a poem that you like by somebody you admire. It would be really great. Well,
thank you, and I will. I think I'll read a short poem from Adamantine.
This is your last collection, done a couple of online. Right?
Yeah, so this is my latest collection, and it contains a sequence that I wrote when I was ill. And I have been reading online a little bit since the lockdown, and I have realized there are so many parallels between my cancer experience and COVID-19. So this is a short poem that maybe touches on maybe one of the more positive similarities. The cancer breakthrough will not take place in a lab or corporate boardroom, won't foam in a test tube, blink in code on a screen, be hawked for megabucks by Big Pharma, or flood the world's RSS feeds. The cancer breakthrough is happening now and again and again in the echoing space, that cold ocean of years between one heart and another. So I think obviously medical advances are essential, but to me it's the spiritual and emotional breakthroughs of illness that will really, really be transformative. And I hope that's a nice note to end on.
Well, it certainly was. It was a powerful note to end on as well. That was great. Thank you so much, Naomi, for taking the time and chatting with me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Matt. Really enjoyed it.